Hello, everyone. I am Shane Conley, and I'm on a product management team here at Kong. I look after our runtimes, which includes Kong Enterprise and our Ingress controller. And I have with me Fel Santiago. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Shane. Fel Santiago, I'm a global director here at Kong. I manage the solutions engineering team.
All right, so let's just get straight into it because we got a lot of content to get through. The title of this talk, as you might have seen, is From Zero to Hero. Our goal here is to really give you the option to sort of understand what the next bit on your personal roadmap at your company is to help the next stage with your API design and usage. So now, I don't know about you, but sometimes when we're discussing APIs, at least I get a little excited. I swear I'm a blast at parties, but you might hear me say something like the following. So, you should be working on a spec first API design before implementation. You can use Insomnia Designer to help with that. You can have that spec checked into Git and go through your typical, review workflows to make sure that your governance requirements are met and that your APIs are observable. You should have a developer portal where those APIs get published as well as discovered by other team members or other teams entirely. You can use Kong Ingress controller for Kubernetes and Deck to help out with the declarative config elements so that you have some assurances as to the end state. Once you get your APIs deployed in production, you should have an operational analytics on top of them. That should feed back into your API implementation so you can make continual improvements, utilizing things like Canary releases and Kong's Canary plugin throughout the process. At the end of the day, your development process may or maybe should look something like the graphic that's here on the slide. Now, that's obviously a mouthful. And while it's generally the direction that I hope a lot of organizations and you might be going through, understanding where to get started or where to go next can be really tough when you're trying to navigate this. You might be, you might have heard all of that and you might be in one of a number of camps. You might be all grown up Spider-Man and be in a place that you are advanced and you're talking about already doing a lot of this or maybe all of that in production. Or you could just be at the beginning of your journey and you're starting to work on some APIs and all of that might have sounded incredibly overwhelming. And that's what this talk is to help you get past. You might be somewhere in between the two. So, today, again, we're going to be talking about going from zero to hero and what the stages are that you can go through in each of those. So no matter what your API plans are, you're going to have an idea of what you should be doing next. Now, every organization is a little bit different. So if you've gone through in a different order or you've tackled some different problems at later stages or earlier stages, it's totally okay. And this is where really what we sort of see based on our users and some of the best practices that we see. So we're going to start off with the beginning. So phase one, you've got an API, or maybe a set of APIs and your team have built out. You want to make sure that you have that API available to other developers inside of your organization or outside, maybe external consumers. But first, you need to make sure that those APIs are secured and observable, logged. Make sure that you have maybe rate limits or ensure that personal data is scrubbed from the requests so that you're GDPR compliant. And at this stage, I'll just hand it over to Fel. He'll walk through a bit of a demo of the Kong Gateway.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. Great. So what I have here is the Kong Gateway, and what this is going to allow me to do is to very easily expose an API and secure that API and govern who actually can access that API as well. So I'll take you through a couple of different scenarios. The first one is I'll show you using Insomnia Designer, which is a tool to both design specs, but also test APIs, that I can access this API and that basically there's no governance and I can simply access it as many times as I need to. And then with Kong, we'll show you really how easy it is to apply policy and secure this API as well. So the API happens to be called customers, okay? And if you notice here, what I'm gonna do is just simply access the API and you can see I get a list of customers back. But you'll notice here, I basically can access this API as many times as I need to. There's really no authentication being required. There's no limiting of how many times I can access the API. So let's apply some governance to this, right? And let's see how Kong makes this really simple to do that. I'll actually use what we call Kong Manager to do this. There's a number of different ways to configure Kong, from declarative configuration to using the admin API to using Kong Manager, which is our admin GUI. And the first thing I'll show you is that in particular, Kong has this concept of governance of who can actually manage API policy within the platform. So here I've logged in as a Kong administrator. You'll notice I've organized my different API groups into what we call workspaces. So I have 4 or 5 different workspaces here. In particular, what I've done is I've configured some teams in Kong where in particular, I've given this user Fel access to only the customers and orders workspaces or application API groups. So let's actually log in with Fel and configure some basic policies for who, the governance and the limiting of access to our customers API. So I have another browser window here. I'll log in as Fel, and once I do that, notice that instead of getting access to all the different application API groupings or workspaces, I only have access to customers and orders. And in particular, I want to work with that customers API. So once here, I can work with my different services and routes for my API. So in particular, I have one API, that customers API. And again, I can access it as many times as I need to. So let's go to that API. And in this particular case, what I'm going to do is add a Kong plugin. And a Kong plugin is essentially policy. So I want to create and apply policy as to who can access this particular API or potentially how often. Kong has a very rich amount or number of plugins or policy that we can apply to this API, from authentication to caching to transformations. This is really giving folks the ability to govern the API exactly the way they want. I'll choose a very simple authentication policy for this example and just require a key authentication to access this particular API. Again, I'll apply it to that customer's API and click create. Now, if I go back to Insomnia Designer and click on that customer's API, you'll notice that now an API key is required before I can configure or access this API. So let's configure a key to access this API. So let's go back to Kong. Let's go to our consumers. Let's go to our consumer here. So consumer is basically a user. And what we're going to do is assign this user a new credential. Let's just call it API key. Click create. And now this consumer or user has a key that we can use to access that API. So let's go back here and add a header called API key and pass in our key, API key. And now I'm able to access that particular API, right? So that's a very quick example around authentication. I can also add, for example, say rate limiting. So at the moment, I can access that API as many times as I want, but probably it's not practical in an environment, right? So I can add another plugin, say the rate limiting plugin, okay? And I can enable a specific number of limits or how often I can access that API. So let's say I want to access that API 5 times per minute. Okay, and let's save that. And now if I go back to my API and I access the API, and just to show you, there's a header now here that tracks how many limits or how many limits I have left or how many limits I've actually executed. And if I go ahead and hit that API 5 times, you'll notice that I'll get a 429 and an API rate limit exceed error coming back from Kong. So just, very simply, in just a couple clicks, in this case using the admin GUI, Kong is able to easily govern access to the API. And keep in mind, right, that Fel user only had access to be able to work with API groups inside of the customers and orders API grouping as well. So I'll turn it back to Shane.
Great, thanks, Phil. And sort of continuing our API journey here. Now hopefully you as in your organization have some APIs and they're properly secured and governed, and you may be here in your organization already. So now it's really time for you to get other parts of the company involved in your APIs. And always say sharing is caring, API sharing doubly so. So this is exactly what Portal is for, and I'll hand it back over to Fel for a demo of Portal.
Yeah, definitely. Great. So we have an API published and it's permission governed properly as we just discussed, right? Now we want other developers to use that API to actually develop applications using the API, right? So one of the great things with Kong is we provide a developer portal or API catalog or API marketplace, depending on your view of the terminology. But essentially, this allows us to publish our APIs, publish our API specifications in particular, and this allows users to browse the catalog and be able to find the APIs that they may want to work with. The portal lets people see not only the APIs, but also the various methods that are part of the different APIs. And the great thing is that me as a developer, I can actually try out the API and execute and see what kind of responses do I expect. I can actually see code snippets as well. So it's very easy for me to get up and running with this API, right? We also address this issue of API reusability. We hear this from customers all the time where they feel like people are recreating work over and over again because we're not aware of what exists already. So by having our APIs in the API catalog or dev portal, we can see what APIs exist. We can quickly see how to use those APIs. We can get code snippets to leverage those APIs. And the entire idea is to be able to be much more productive faster and be able to reuse what already exists. So if you remember my customer's API, I now want to, as a developer, access that API. So I'm going to log in here as a developer. I have a developer called Nick. And Nick will log into the developer portal, right? Say he found the customer API. He wants to now leverage it. Now he wants to actually leverage that API in a production environment. So this is Nick's view, his personal view into the dev portal. And what I'm going to do as Nick is go to my apps, click on new application, and define a new application here for, say, customers. Provide a redirect URL and click create. Now, part of what I've done with this customer API is I've made this API available so developers can request access to that API. So in particular, now that Nick has an application defined, he can use these credentials which were provisioned for self-service. I mean, Nick, these are independent and individual to Nick. He can access these credentials to use these credentials to access any of the services that are tied to this particular application. So here's that customer's API, right? I can go ahead and click activate saying I want to use this API within my application. Right? And in that particular case, the status for that API is now active. So that now means that Nick can use these credentials, which were provisioned uniquely for him, to access this API as well. So it's very easy with Portal to publish API specifications, allow developers to browse those specifications, and then we very easily, in a self-service manner, allow those developers to create accounts, create applications, and to activate usage of those services within their apps. Turn back to Shane.
Great, thanks, Phil. And I think it's a fantastic sort of segue into what we often hear users sort of on the next stage of their journey. So, you can imagine you're a user, you maybe now have a few APIs, they're secured. Other developers in the company can discover those APIs. You might have teams that are now creating and sharing these APIs and making sure that you're not having that net new rebuild of functionality, and everyone's able to reuse the existing APIs that are out there. And it may, often at this point, we often see companies sort of going into the next stage where they say, actually, those specifications that are built up on top of those APIs, we want to bring those forward. We want to start doing spec first development. So this helps give some assurances that your APIs are well designed before you go off and write the code to implement them. It gives teams sort of some opportunity to mock up requests and responses, and makes really the whole development process just much more stable. And like the rest of the code for the implementation, often we see companies want to check in those specifications into Git, have them reviewed as code would be. And really, this is really where you know, we're continuing to build out our story, and that tool that Fel showed a bit ago, Insomnia, and some of the CLI tools that come along with it, and some Git sort of workflow, really starts coming together and helps you get into a much better place. So Fel, you can walk through a little bit of Insomnia and some of that Git workflow.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So in this particular case, I'm using Insomnia Designer, and the goal is to be able to collaborate on an open API specification, and then have the open API specification be that blueprint that both, say, front-end and back-end developers can use to, in parallel, develop applications together, right? So in this case, I have just a simple ordering API with a couple different, methods like, V1 order here. So Insomnia Designer does a couple really nice things for us. One, it gives us this open API specification editor. It gives us the ability to, for example, as we build out the API, if there are errors or problems, it can lint and tell us and really help us properly and effectively build this open API specification. It also gives us this preview here as well, so we can see, all the different methods. So here's the order method. Here's what it's actually going to look like as we publish this API, say, to the Kong developer portal, as an example. And the great thing is as teams want to collaborate on this, then we can integrate this open API specification into Git. So say I have a couple different team members I want to share this open API specification with. Maybe various people on the team actually work on the API specification as well. We can actually synchronize this open API specification into Git. So here, for example, I've taken Insomnia Designer and this particular open API spec, and I've actually configured it to go to a Git repository. And I can go ahead and, if I make any changes, I can go ahead and push those changes, and I can commit those changes and have those changes pushed up to my Git repository, which will allow other folks to collaborate with me on this. The other nice thing with Insomnia Designer is I could then, from the specification, actually build automatic tests for that specification. So I actually see a couple tests that were automatically generated from that open API spec. And the idea is to allow developers that are designing specs to very quickly test those APIs as well. We also have the ability to create unit tests or automatic tests that can run against the open API specification as well. So what I'm going to do in this demonstration is a couple things. One, I'm actually going to make a change to this open API specification. I'm then going to push that change into Git. And what's going to happen is that I have a Git Actions runner that will then, off that change, actually deploy this open API specification to Kong to make this API available as well, right? And I want you to notice as well, there's some additional policy that I've embedded for Kong purposes into this particular API. And what I'm actually going to be doing is I'm actually going to be mocking the responses from this API because this API doesn't yet exist. So I'm going to let Kong mock a response to the API. And then once the API is actually built out and deployed, I can actually remove the mocking and have the request go to the actual API. So let's just make a quick change here. Just, change the description here. And I'll go ahead and push that change. Okay. So submit that change first. Okay. And then let's go ahead and just commit everything. And let's go ahead and push that change. Okay. And what's going to happen because of that is we're actually going to kick off a Git Actions job to actually get that change to be applied, right? So let me go ahead and do that now. And let me actually show you the Git Actions job here. Let's see, this should launch here. So we'll go ahead and push that change up to Git. And based on our job, what's actually going to happen is that this open API specification will get deployed to Kong, and we'll actually take that spec and also deploy it to the Kong developer portal. So let's check in that change. We'll go ahead and push the change that we saw before. And what should happen is we should see a job execute here. This is our runner that's running and actually pushing out those changes. So here's our job taking effect. And what's happening is we're actually taking that open specification and actually converting it into a Kong declarative configuration and deploying that. And we can see that the job was successful. So if we actually go back to Insomnia Designer and then run some of these tests, because we've now deployed this API, and again, we're mocking the results coming back, we should see that API now available. So we're able to fully deploy this API through Kong in a completely automatic way using open API specifications, a CI pipeline, and seeing the results here of an available API with some mock results. If we go back to the Kong developer portal as well, just to show you that, we will also be able to see that API in the actual Kong developer portal as well. So let's go ahead and do that so you can see the results there. So let's log in real quick. Let's go to our dev portals. Let's go to our orders dev portal, and we should see that API also now available. Okay. So there's an end-to-end flow of API deployment for you, Shane.
That's awesome, Phil. Yeah, so Phil, you skipped ahead a little bit in terms of our roadmap, or you included two things in the same bit. I just want to point out that you can break up, and we often do see users break up the spec-based development and using something like Insomnia Designer to go through and develop those specs, deploy them from the actual GitOps sort of CI/CD driven, ultimately deploying this out to the gateway. But I think it's really powerful to have both of them together. So we often see people moving through these things ultimately with that as the direction. Last, I'll just sort of mention one more thing. So often, phase 5 is you've successfully built these APIs, you're sharing them back and forth. You're driving these implementations through, spec first driven development. But maybe everything that you've done so far has been on AWS. And you found out the new team in the office of the CTO uses GCP for all of their new projects. And they want to make use of your APIs or vice versa. Guess what? You're going multi-cloud. And Kong recently announced that you can split the control plane from the data plane inside of the gateway, which makes these sort of hybrid cloud or multi-cloud setups much, much easier. The way it works is that the Kong control plane gateway node is responsible for maintaining that configuration state. And data planes get a declarative config from that control plane anytime changes happen, and it pushes those down into each of those data planes so they can continue to proxy traffic no matter where they're at. So this allows you to go multi-cloud or hybrid cloud, for example. And if that's sort of in your roadmap, consider going to Kong 2.2 and using the hybrid mode feature. And while that's sort of powerful itself, what's particularly powerful about this architecture, as you might have seen in the keynote, is that Kong can actually host the control plane and take that operational burden off you as well. This gets you back to the company that hopefully you're doing what you do best, which is writing and using APIs. So hopefully, you found that you sit somewhere on this growth pattern, and maybe you figured out the next thing that you can or should be working on. And so when I'm at the party next time with you, and I go through this entire workflow of being spec first, API driven, using Insomnia for the design, ultimately pushing this through a CI/CD GitOps workflow, having the declarative config go out to Kubernetes or your other on-prem services using our declarative config tool deck, and monitoring things with vitals and having a dev portal that's well shared. Hopefully this all makes a little bit more sense and you know where you should be going next. I'll maybe skip past the advanced capabilities or just briefly mention them. You might find that the next stage is actually for you to go off and develop GraphQL or gRPC. And as Fel mentioned a bit earlier, Kong is at the ready with additional plugins to help you do all those advanced capabilities. You'll find those at docs.konghq.com/hub. And we're continuing to build these out, including with, like I said, Kong 2.2, Kong Gateway 2.2, the ability to route UDP traffic as well. So if you're developing APIs for audio or video streaming services, for example, or gaming, continue to use Kong Gateway. So that's the end of the talk. Hopefully, we start off with something like this and maybe you're now unblocked. I think we maybe have 1 or 2 minutes for questions. If you have any of those, you can type them down in the chat box below.